Hello and a warm welcome to today's webinar, Boosting Customer Acquisition Remotely Without Compromising Trust and Security in Partnership with Thales. I'm Michelle Good, I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Good Intelligence, and I'm going to be your host and moderator for today's session. I'm pleased to say that we'll be recording today's session, so it will be on demand very shortly, and you'll be able to watch it at a time that's convenient to you no matter where you are in the world. So that will make it particularly convenient for our global audience. On the agenda today, we'll start off with an introduction from Alan Good, our CEO and Chief Analyst at Good Intelligence. And then we'll be following that with a keynote from Sinhal Hanna from Thales, and he'll be talking about the role that technology plays in digital onboarding. So then Sinhal and Alan will join me in the Q&A panel session afterwards to take your questions, and we'll explore the topic a bit further. Just go through a couple of housekeeping points. You can send in your questions at any time. Please just use the Q&A facility that you can see at the bottom of your screen. And then we will answer as many of these questions as we can during the Q&A panel session. That will be just after the keynote presentation. I'll be keeping us on schedule, of course, so that we finish as planned on time at 3 p.m. That's UK time. So if we don't get to your question, please don't worry, as we will follow up with you individually afterwards to make sure you get an answer to that question. So we'll also follow up with a link to the recording as well, so you can catch up on anything that you miss. So let's get started. I'd like to welcome Alan Good, our CEO and Chief Analyst here at Good Intelligence, so that he can share his thoughts with you on this very important topic. Over to you, Alan.
Thank you, Michelle. Hello, my name is Alan Good. I'm the CEO and Chief Analyst here at Good Intelligence. I'm going to just go and share my screen now so that we can run through a couple of items on my presentation. Let me start the slide. Here we go. My apologies for that. So just a quick run through about who we are. We are a leading authentication, identity and biometrics research consulting and events company. I founded the business in 2007, and we are headquartered in London, UK. We work internationally with technology vendors, service providers and end users, and our services have been built to inform, educate and influence the market. Our clients include super brands like Thales, right through to hot emerging startups and market disruptors. So let's first of all start off with looking at some context here. I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just going through some of the kind of the mega trends and the impact of COVID. The fourth industrial revolution is well and truly with us and has been accelerated as a result of COVID-19. We are now much more embedded into the digital world. Our homes have become our offices, schools, shops, and places to watch film and theatre. A statistic that was recently shared by McKinsey kind of highlights this monumental shift online. For the USA, the first half of 2020 saw an increase in e-commerce equivalent to that of the previous 10 years. There is evidence that even when we come out of the current pandemic, much of this change in behavior will remain with us. And when we start to come out of lockdown and start to socialize, more challenges remain in how to work and travel in a safe and secure way. As we move increasingly online and access more services that have value, including financial transactions or providing sensitive private information, then fraudsters and criminals are increasingly targeting digital services. There has been a quantifiable increase in fraud attacks across many digital services, many of them using the current pandemic as bait. Phishing attacks that are trying to offer things like PPE, COVID testing and vaccinations are a way to deliver malware. And throughout the world, we've been seeing an increase in these attacks. With the increasing demand on digital services, comes a number of challenges, many of them connected to attempts to achieve the balance between security and convenience. If you do not get this balance right, then you can turn away customers and users. They will go elsewhere. If it takes too long to complete a task, or if there are too many hurdles to go through, or you have security measures that are too cumbersome. So what we need is a convenient, frictionless, and secure method to identify employees, consumers, citizens, and travelers when applying for and accessing digital services. To end my presentation, I would like to share some insight from our research into this market. Back in 2019, the world before COVID, we forecast that there will be over 2 billion digital identity and document verification checks annually by 2024. Last year, we updated these figures with a statement saying that we're going to be seeing at least a 20% increase to our 2019 forecasts as a result of more demand for remote digital onboarding, digital identity, and document verification. Thank you. I would like now to hand back to today's moderator, Michelle. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Alan. That was really informative. I've put lots of great insight there. I'm delighted to have Sinhal Hanna join us now from Thales. Sinhal, if you'd like to join our virtual stage, and I'll hand over to you.
Great, thank you very much, Michelle. Let me just set up sharing here. Looks to work. Great, thank you very much, and welcome. Good to see everybody here on the virtual space. Thank you for taking the time. My name is Sinhal Hanna, and I'm spending a little time here together with Alan and Michelle to speak about digital onboarding. As Alan kind of put it, you know, the world has changed in an accelerated way, partly because of COVID, but most of the underlying trends, I think, we're ready to go. You know, if you're ordering your food at home, if you're able to work from home, to the extent if you're able to set up your bank account at home or on the street, you know, or if you're experiencing perhaps an accelerated way of accessing any services, many of those things, the technology that sort of underpins those abilities were either in emerging stage or they were there, and what we're seeing in the world is that because of the ongoing pandemic, because of the way that people have to do more from home and from remote, it's been totally amplified in terms of what is expected from service providers. It really has to work. And so, first of all, let me tell you about Thales a little bit, because some of you are thinking, well, why is Thales talking about this? You know, many of you may have heard of Thales Group before. Thales is a very large and a very extensive technology group headquartered in France. You may know Thales more historically in areas of aerospace and defense, in type of solutions that are related more to signal processing, or also perhaps when you used to take planes before, in in-flight entertainment and so on. Now, by way of the acquisition of Gemalto, another French company in the digital identity and security space, Thales now has a very, very strong foothold in this area. And so now digital identity and security, which is the formal name of the global business unit, is one of the global business units of Thales. And in this space, Gemalto, that's foundation of this space, was already a leader in digital security, whether that is helping you to do access management, whether that's helping you to do secure payment. And one of the space that, of course, DIS, as we call it, had been a leader globally for many years, is civil identity. And in the sense of whether that is actually producing the ID documents for citizens on behalf of national governments, of course, or helping governments to build e-gov platforms, to do digital identity platforms, and indeed various e-government services. And via an acquisition that Gemalto had done, which was the Cogent division from 3M, we also now have a very strong in-house capability for biometrics, various forms of biometrics from finger to facial biometrics, which is very often used in digital identity. So that's one of the main reasons why Thales is now very, very present in this space, and one reason why we're taking the time to share with you some of the findings that we've seen, some of the thoughts we have as we interact with the rest of the markets. Coming back a little bit to what Alan was saying earlier, clearly digital identity and digital onboarding especially is no longer the way it used to be. Some years ago, people were talking about KYC, know your customer, which was kind of a regulatory requirement that was impacting mainly the financial space and sometimes in the telecom space that required people to prove their identity as they were opening bank accounts and so on. Those space have propagated enormously beyond those regulatory requirements. We truly live in a space now where everything can be done digitally. People expect them to be done digitally. And with things being done digitally, it also becomes totally remote. The trend started before the pandemic and it's been fully accelerated because of the pandemic. You literally have to be able to open a bank account at home. You gotta be able to sign up for new membership for various services at home. And because people see that you can do these things now remotely without going to the branches, we firmly believe this is going to be the expectation going forward. So there are many applications, everyday applications that you may not be doing much. And I'm typically thinking about flying and traveling. We'll take a pause because of the pandemic, but what you can bet on is that when the world comes back to some of the activities before, the convenience that we got during the pandemic in terms of being remote, being able to use our digital identity to do things is going to become the bedrock of how we interact in the future. Which means digital onboarding, digital identity needs to work. There are two parts of that service. There's the people who are using the service and the other people who are providing that service. And those two parties both have their needs. And largely, combine both what Alan was saying earlier and also the observation that we've made in the market space. There's clearly two parts where you, on the one hand, you want a very, very smooth experience because consumers are continuing to get ever easier services provided to them. If you look at our day-to-day consumer electronics and day-to-day consumer services, the benchmark for what is easy and convenient and totally smooth is set by kind of the B2C companies, and they do a great job. Behind the scenes, all the service providers, we call them the relying parties, whether that's a financial institution or that could be a company that's providing some kind of service, it could be healthcare, it could be catering, it could be some sort of related to online services. They have a need to make sure that they sign people up, they attract people onto their platform, attract people to use their service, and they have to make sure that they fight against fraud. Because the last thing you want to do is open up a wonderful online service that could be car sharing, it could be booking your tickets in advance and checking in and so on and so forth. But you got to safeguard against people who are taking advantage of not having a face-to-face. You got to take a safeguard against people who are going to try to, whether for economic, for money reasons, or even for more sinister reasons that are made to do with national security and so on, to take advantage of the fact that we're no longer having kind of a face-to-face check. So it becomes increasingly important that we are able to design solutions and support solutions to that extent that offer both a very, very seamless, very smooth kind of user experience that is fast, that is easy to use, that respect people's needs for privacy. At the same time, allow the relying parties to be able to service their customer in a way that is totally seamless, that is always on, that works everywhere. And it has to provide a business rationale because it can't just be adding more costs and adding more costs. So there's all these considerations that are interplaying that makes this topic rather complex. So that sort of sets the scene. So actually, before we do that, could we? I think we wanted to run a quick poll and ask. Oh, there we go. So to make your life really polarized, if you really had to choose between convenience and security, put yourself in your normal hat, whether you're a consumer or a service provider, and you couldn't have both, what would you sacrifice, or what would you choose rather? You know, what would you opt for, and therefore, what would you let go if you had to choose only one? It would be interesting to see what's more important for the people who are here on the call today. Once that's done. Michelle, should we see the results?
I've just shown you the results.
I'm curious.
So there we go. So 75% would choose security and 25% choose convenience.
Yeah, very interesting. I would have thought something that's a little bit more 50-50, but finally it turns out to be. It's good to see that people really do understand that security is underpinning why you should even install this in the first place. Because if not, you know, just let people walk right through, or just give people a bank account. Right? So indeed, security is the reason why these solutions and these technology exists. I think the other, you know, to take the view of the other 25%, you could basically say, well, that's fine, but unless you're forced to do something, for example, I must apply for an ID card because I'm a citizen of a certain country, and therefore I have to put up with the process that exists. So unless you're in the kind of a process that you don't have a choice but to do it, most of the time you have to make sure that people go through the process, and you have to make sure that people don't drop off halfway through, otherwise you don't bring your users on board. So making sure that it's sufficiently convenient, especially in the commercial space, is important. Now there's one other space where I think being convenient also plays a major role, which is whenever you have an existing backup. Imagine for a moment you want people to pre-check in for a flight, for example. And there's a fallback to say, well, if you don't want to do it at home, if you don't want to do this digitally, you can always come to the airport and do it at a gate. If you make the process of doing things beforehand too complex, people will just fall back to what they know. You know, so there's probably the only time where you want to think about that as well. But indeed, an interesting topic. But let's take those two angles, right? Because I think it's part of the thinking is how can we get the best of both worlds? You probably cannot have 100% of both. You're always looking for a balance, and depending on the use case, depending on the context, one or the other may be more important. Although you need to arrive at a certain baseline level for both sides. So let's take both angles a little bit. Let's first look at, you know, what makes a smooth user experience. What makes a smooth digital onboarding journey? And a lot of the ingredients or the key success factors that we've picked up from looking at customer requirements, looking at actual projects, learning from the actual difficulties that end users have had, have related to the fact that how do you deliver a service that is indeed goes beyond what channels they had in the past. Channels in the past could mean they come to a face-to-face meeting, it could be they come to the website. And if you want to make that more convenient, if you want to make that anywhere you go, what is the end user use case? Is the website enough? Do you need to go on a mobile phone? And how does that work? If somebody's if you want someone to go and car rental and pick up a car without going into the car rental branch, is it practical to ask them to log onto a web page or just take out their mobile phone? There are different requirements and different use cases. So one of the first things that we always think about is really map out the user journey. Because if you really understand what the user journey, literally, you know, it just looks at that individual that's going through that experience. What does that person need to really achieve the anytime, anywhere? I think it's very important. Of course, it goes without saying that it needs to be something that everybody can use. So if you're going to end up creating a mobile login or onboarding experience, it needs to be something that people don't say, wow, you know, that's great, I'd love to use that, but I don't have a handset that works in your platform. Or, you know, you're asking me to prove my identity. I need to be, take an example, you want me to prove my identity, I need to have a Facebook account first. Well, that's not going to work because I don't have a Facebook account, maybe, and so on and so forth. So one of the things about making it convenient that we've discussed with some customers is the role of the government issue ID, because the government issue ID is about as universal as it gets. Beyond the government issue ID, the only thing that's even more universal that everybody has one is your biometrics. Sadly, your biometric doesn't have your name written on it, and there's no one in the world that can yet act as a central authority that says, yes, I can tell you that I legally, or not myself, but someone who comes and say, this face legally belongs to Senhao or anybody, or Alan or Michelle. And so the closest that we get to in the end is your government issued ID. And there's that universality that is very important for anyone to be able to use it, which is a little bit different from saying, well, I would love to check you are Senhao, you are indeed Senhao, but first we need to check, what are your, which database may have you as a record, or what are your digital footprints on the internet, so we can check on that. Not everybody has digital footprints everywhere, and not everybody wants to have the digital footprint queried on. There's a question of privacy as well. So there's that convenience factor. Another thing that makes for a really smooth user journey is the performance of the solution itself. When we say minimize user friction, we really mean minimize to the absolute necessary steps. We've looked at a lot of different apps. We've discussed a lot with customers who are talking to us about our learning experience from other applications that we've seen, how to make it so that the minimum number of steps for someone to enroll. If we don't need to ask you to blink your eyes and turn your head, let's not do it. Why ask for that extra step? Certainly, real-time responses is one of the things that comes up a lot. People are saying, well, when you're asking someone to sign up for a new account, it may be an online application, it may be a new mobile app, could be a game, it could be something related. The time between somebody signing up and the account being validated, you can lose the number of your customers already. Or they'll say, we'll come back later, and we'll come back 3 months later. So a lot of these aspects about dependability, real-time responses, if your service becomes a real hit, then everybody wants to use it. Can it take the load? Can it take the large load of traffic? We had experiences discussing with customers that worry a lot about what happens just before the Christmas rush. Are we making sure that those kind of services are scaled for industrial usage? So those type of discussions, are very important to ensure that the relying party, and therefore the consumer, really says, here's a service that works. Because that's what people are looking for. People are looking for something that just works. And so for the people who are providing the technology to take care of the A to Z of everything that goes into making something that appears on the relying parties' app, because many of our relying party customers simply have their own app. And they just want that to drop in, seamlessly integrate with the brand of the relying party. If you're going to a bank, for example, or if you're going to an airline, or you're going to a healthcare provider, and you want to sign up to their program, the last thing you want to do is to say, okay, you have to download this other app, or you got to jump between screens and everything looks different. Or if you're a service provider, you have to design a totally separate user journey and then complicate every friction you add. Remember, every friction that you add to the process, in the end, you're going to have some people who's going to say, I don't have time to do this right now, I'll come back to it later. And then you've lost the customer there. So in terms of making sure that everything fits in seamlessly with the existing brand user experience of the relying party is one of the key areas that really requires to say, here's the way I interact with my airline. And so everything's really, really easy and do this in one step, whereas as well, you got to go and wait for 24 hours, or here's a screen that looks totally different, that's got a very, very strange and very importantly, very intrusive type of experience. So imagine you're a service provider. You've built an entire user experience where you say data privacy is number one. We don't ask you for any questions that we don't need. We don't ask you for any data we don't need. When it comes to your data proving, your identity proving, suddenly you say, well, we're going to need all those extra things. And here's the small print. You got to save this, you got to save that, etc. that breaks the brand user experience as well. So in the end, when it comes to delivering a very smooth user experience across the board, it is not just about designing a beautiful looking user interface. It needs to be thought of in the context of what is the user journey, what does the person want to use it, when does this person want to use it, how that person is going to use it, and what do you really need from that person, and remove all the other noise. At the same time, make sure that the service works, the service delivers what is being asked for, and it doesn't crash under the pressure of high traffic and so on. And of course, very importantly, all of this needs to feel seamless, but it needs to deter fraud, because we don't do this just to have an extra step that kind of feels good. I mean, we do this so that relying parties can counter against fraud. Okay? So let's take a look also at the level of checks, the type of thing that goes into securing such an identity onboarding. You've all said, many of you have said that security is paramount. If you could only choose one thing, you would choose security. Let me quickly comment on the way we approach security, the way we thought about this. And this comes from talking with industry bodies, talking with customers, and seeing what really matters to them. One of the things that we learned from the market is when you want to build trust with your users, it is not just about saying the right things. It's not about putting words out there like, we respect your privacy and so on and so forth. What it actually comes down to is being transparent. The way you gain people's trust is literally tell them, this is what we're going to do with your data. We will save your data. We won't save your data. We will only save your data if we ask you permission for it. You get to choose consent, etc., etc. There needs to be a clear communication and make end users understand what data you're going to capture from them, why do you want to capture data, and very importantly, what you're going to do with that data. As far as the underlying solution and technology goes, these are very easy to answer questions. Most of these questions are part of the solution spec. So it is really more about saying, we have to save a copy of your face biometrics, because if we don't save a copy of your face biometrics, there's no way we can use your face as a password next time. But then you have to say, where do we save it? How do we save it? How do we protect it? So I think it's very important when it comes to building trust. It is really about being transparent and explaining how data is managed and stored. It goes hand in hand. So I'm going to jump over to compliance, because it goes hand in hand with the efforts that regulatory bodies are making, which is making sure that there's some form of a level playing field in terms of the people in the industry. They are respecting some basic rights when it comes to consumers' data, personal data. GDPR is probably one of the best known framework that is not necessarily very detailed, but certainly many different companies look at that, and there are clear guidelines that help companies to think about how do they want to implement their data-related services. And so you tie that back to trust. There are many ways you can meet GDPR, but what matters is that you're clear in how you actually, what data, what you do with it, where do you put it, why do you want it, etc. If you're clear about that and you have a clear policy and a clear process for managing data, you will be able to meet your GDPR needs. And this is absolutely critical. Because before we even talk about security in terms of a security feature, first you've got to be a service that is intuitive. Not intuitive, it's not the right word. It's got to be a service that people look at and say, okay, yeah, I want to use this service. And look at that and say, well, I don't know what this is. Why are they asking me for that? Why do they want to know what online transactions I've done? Why do they want to dig into my Facebook account and check on things? There are all these questions. And at the same time, if you put that together with compliance needs, normally you should have a very good basis for the way you approach security. Then comes the solution itself. There are a lot of flavors in terms of how to prove someone's identity. Certainly we've been talking a lot about using a government issued ID, but that's obviously not the only way. And there are other ways in checking third-party databases. There are ways to cross-check people's online footprints, and so on and so forth. I think it's what's important, aside from the comment I made earlier, which is government issue ID is sort of a universally available way of legally checking somebody's identity. It's also important to know that when you're checking somebody's identity proving, you need to do a complete set of checks. You need to check not just, like when you go to the airport, you just put your passport on the self-service kiosk, and the only thing it does is checks what we call the MRZ at the bottom of the passport. There's not a lot of things there to check. It's a set of simple. It's like a barcode. It's practically a barcode. It just tells you some information about the person. But there are other ways. There are many ways you can check the security of that document. Most of these documents were designed with secure printing features in mind. There are various visual elements in those documents. It could be an emblem, it could be a certain type of lines, it could be certain designs. There are logical checks, there are data format checks that you can check. So there are many ways that police and various law enforcement already do today to make sure that they can look at the document and they can look for the things that they check against to know that documents are authentic. And so the industry has been racing to move a lot of this manual knowledge into a software algorithm. And so that's area, and I think that's a key point to exploit for everyone in the industry, because there are ways to see whether or not something is hampered and something is meeting the way the document were designed. Okay, so I think it's important to look at that and also think about if this is an entire solution where the identity proving is going from the capturing of the person's document and face in the front end to checking security features in the back end. There are multiple layers of cybersecurity that need to be thought about. How do we make sure that the image is being captured is definitely coming from the person in the real time? How do we make sure there isn't a man in the middle? How do we make sure that people aren't injecting certain video feeds? These are all aspects that can be mitigated as part of the security solution. It's really important that these identity proving solutions don't turn into a sort of casual, just take a picture, and we just want to know that it's easy to take a picture. And once you've taken the picture, we check a few things that are easy to check and let the person through. Then, I will say that you've invested in a solution that doesn't get you the most important point, which is rooting out all the fraud on incoming traffic. So these are two elements that I think are kind of the cornerstones of doing digital onboarding remotely. And there is some compromise between the two. If you're going to add a lot of checks, the more checks you add and the more stringent the checks you add, the more likely you're going to turn away some genuine applicants or genuine users. In industry, we call that false rejection. At the same time, if you make it too easy, you will have a lot of false acceptance. You will let people who are could be genuine people but haven't done proper checks through, and you let them through. So finding a balance to say, well, certain things must be checked, but make that as light as possible for the end user. I think that's where the balance lies. So let me try to put that in the perspective of a typical user journey. So I mentioned earlier that there are different ways to do ID proving. Here, we're talking a little bit about ID proving in the context of capturing somebody's government-issued ID and then matching their facial biometrics against that of the ID. I mean, the facial biometrics is somewhat unique because it's the only biometrics that is present on all the IDs. Almost all IDs have your photo on it. Most of the IDs don't have your fingerprints or iris or voice, etc. So there is definitely, again, the universal applicability when it comes to doing these, which gets you the broadest reach. That's one of the reasons why this type of ID proving checks still shows itself to be the most applicable everywhere you go. So we mentioned earlier, some of the key element that goes into getting this thing to work, some of the key qualities, if you like, the universal nature of the government issue ID, you've got to do a complete set of checks. You got to make that easy, so there's a lot of automatic detection, a lot of automatic capture, whether that's a document or your face. And of course, you got to get a real-time analysis and response. You don't want to wait. So part of the good news in this, and this is probably where the technology piece comes in to say where this industry has moved a lot, is injecting new technology and new techniques. A lot of those new technology are related to machine learning models, and use of AI. Because let me give you a real life example. If you want your handset camera to be able to just point at your ID document, let's say I got an ID document, I'll just put it on the table, and I just take my camera and point at it. How do you do it so that the end user doesn't have to do anything? All you have to do is point your camera at the document. The software will do everything else. Well, that's where a machine learning model can play a role, and knows where the document is, knows it's an ID document, knows to trigger the automatic capture, knows how to crop the document automatically. So it just works like magic. There's no fumbling about saying, please frame your document in a certain space, So that's one area where machine learning model has already played a role. Clearly in verifying a lot of security features, being able to tell what a fraud looks like. That's where machine learning model is very important. A lot of image analysis that we're all working on these days is all based on machine learning models that can look at authentic copies versus tampered copies. And likewise with face, a lot of the work that's being done on face biometrics, whether that's related to liveness detection being that you are the subject in a capture is live, meaning on that spot in that moment, and not a reproduced copy. A lot of that is based on machine learning models that are able to distinguish between different types of, it could be an image, it could be a stream. So machine learning models underpinning almost everything that we're doing in this space these days. Now after that, we are probably at a juncture in this industry where most people have a printed document historically, and we've all had our printed documents and laminates and so on. But more and more documents are coming into our pockets that have a chip. And this is a fundamentally different type of verification that you can use for digital onboarding, in the sense that if you are reading your information from a chip, and in your electronic passport or your new electronic IDs, you will see either a chip or you can be read contactlessly through a type of NFC-based reading. It changes the verification process from deciphering what you see in an image to one of simply, it's a digital certificate. All that you're doing is verifying the authenticity of a digital certificate. There's no trying to decipher, here's a text written on the page, what does that text mean? Here's a portrait of your face, can we crop it correctly so that we can match your face to face? It's a totally different type of verification. So another one of the key technology that's come into play in this space is the ability to do e-verification, the ability to simply do a certificate check. And so those areas are two of the areas that completely change the way industry players can do verifications. And similarly, when it comes to face verification and checking for liveness, there's a lot of advances, again, built on using machine learning models to be able to give end user a smoother user experience, to the point that we can actually today do a liveness check without the traditional way of asking people to turn their heads, open their mouth, etc., etc. You can simply, from the end user's point of view, all that you're asked to do is take a selfie. Take a selfie, and we'll do the rest behind the scenes. So there's a lot of advances in this space that are coming in, and I'm sure there will be more technology being introduced in this space continuously. And that's kind of a good news for providing more and more, both in terms of security as well as convenience. Now, finally, just
remind you, just a couple more minutes, and then we'll move on to some questions.
No problem. I'll quickly wrap up here, because I think having talked through the technology and the type of things that people are doing, I mentioned earlier that these type of ID onboarding has moved well beyond the days of doing KYC. I've sort of touched on many of these applications before, so I will not go through them one by one. But you can imagine the ability to sign on remotely, digitally to a program of some kind. It's not only relevant for opening a bank account. This becomes very applicable the day when we start traveling again, to be able to check in before you go to the airport and show up at the airport you're already checked in, and they may even have a copy of your face. So you can literally walk through and use your face as your boarding pass. Same idea with car rental, or even starting your own car eventually. Someone has starting an ignition. I think hotel and air travel, they're very much related. We live in a COVID world. Contactless journey is another webinar we did together with Alan not that long ago. Contactless journey is a major trend. I think that's coming for people to be able to do self check-in, self-service kiosks. But these type of everything's based on a membership these days, whether that's healthcare, whether that's government services, whether that's retail. So all of these things require people to digitally onboard. And more people want to be able to check that you really are who you are, but without making you feel like your personal space is intruded. So I think this is where this conversation we've been having about convenience versus security really need to take place, and really try to capture as many of the key factors on both sides as we can. And so with that, maybe we can move on to taking some questions.
Thank you very much, Sinhao. Some great points there, and some really useful insight on the elements needed for a smooth user journey, particularly in today's environment. We're going to move on to our Q&A session now, so I'm welcoming back Alan. And I can see we've got some questions coming in already. If you would like to submit a question, please just use the Q&A facility at the bottom of your screen. So let's get started. First one here for Alan. What's driving the market for this technology?
I think Sinha's covered a lot of this in his presentation, but really it's the, obviously we're moving online increasingly. We have to have a way to enable people to access services where they need to verify identity. So it's been driven by regulation, by compliance issues, especially with financial services companies, but it's the need to conveniently identify people in real time, remotely, and really the best things that, as Sinha's mentioned, the best ways to do that is to use trusted government issued documents and facial recognition through biometrics.
Thank you. Anything you wanted to add to that, Sinha?
In terms of drivers, we talked about COVID-19 not that long ago, and you mentioned earlier the pandemic is changing the world. Of course, right now in the midst of a pandemic, many of us can't imagine traveling anytime soon, but we know world travel will come back. And one of the key areas that people want to facilitate, trusted is maybe the right word. Yeah, how do you help people who want to travel feel secure? And part of that is maybe doing tests before you go to the airport, which, as it's good and bad, there are many different applications. And part of that is this whole topic about contactless journey. Contactless journey is being asked by a lot of people. How do you ask people, how do you help your consumers to do everything that they're doing today without having to go through the same level of contact as they used to have? It may be driven by the pandemic, but once you've got that level of convenience, it will be here to stay. It will become the norm in the future.
Thank you. I've got a question here from the event. Do you use any onboarding tools to increase product adoption of your customers, or that you developed yourself?
Onboarding tool, not in Thales, because Thales is a business-to-business company. So we're a technology provider to other service providers. But we certainly have a lot of service providers who are very present in all of our lives. So yes, I find Thales technology in my daily life, including our onboarding, digital onboarding technology, but we don't do it directly ourselves. We're not a B2C company.
Okay. Another question here, it's an interesting one. How can an organization ensure that its solution works for everyone? For example, both young and old users. In other words, how do you improve conversion and adoption rates? Now,
Alan, do you want to start?
Yeah, I think it's very important. I think sometimes we do not consider people that some people do not have smartphones. Some people do not have phones that support NFC. So even in the Western world where we got over 100% penetration, I think we need to be inclusive enough to design technology to ensure that we're reaching out to everyone. So I think it's a case of look at the lowest common denominator in terms of what do people have, what do people access, support in branch or kind of physical. And it's difficult at the moment but you need, I think, to support a wide range of channels, including the physical, and that's where you can probably get to reach out to those members of the population, and in other regions of the world where they don't have access to the internet or to the latest smartphone.
Yeah. And it's related to why earlier I singled out government issued ID from other ways of doing ID proving. On the topic of inclusiveness, and the service providers are always thinking, how do I deploy a service that everybody can use? And if you want to check people's identity, the only one that everybody can prove they really are who they are is the government issued ID. That's that, very, very open and very relevant for everyone.
Absolutely. So how do you factor in for scale or increased demand when you're offering digital onboarding? So, for example, how would you cope from having 3,000 users going right up to 40,000 users in a short time period?
Well, I think this is where most of the players in this space are offering cloud-based as a service. So yes, there are many usages where people want to license the solution, run it themselves, and et cetera, et cetera. But I think there's a clear trend that people are asking for this to be a SaaS-based service. And so the industry is relatively mature when it comes to SaaS management, operating SaaS services. You have to make sure that the provider has experience in handling scaling and so on and so forth. But most respectable providers, I think, that understand how SaaS cloud services are managed should be able to handle peak traffic. And it's a test whether you got to provide as a serious provider that can do things at industrial scale, or just a provider who's very good at doing small innovation.
Sure. Another question here. Is it satisfactory to use consumer-grade technology, for example, a person's smartphone, rather than corporate-grade technology such as security cameras in a building or dedicated document scanners in order to identify an individual for onboarding purposes?
Mm-hmm. Well, I will say that this entire industry exists because of the intention to use mass market handsets. Everybody does have a smartphone. Most smartphones do amazing images, have incredible processing power. So the concept of the industry has existed for a long time, but the industry is taking off in a big way, mainly because of all the personal devices that are now available. So you don't need to ask people to have access to a dedicated scanner of some kind. So I would say it's very, very accessible today.
Alan, did you have anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think, obviously a dedicated scanner is potentially can be more accurate in meeting some of the security characteristics that you have in a passport, and that's what it's designed for. It can perhaps see EV light, but then again, a smartphone is well connected and can pull in data to corroborate someone's identity from a wide range of sources, as Sinhao alluded to in his presentation. So I think I think the mobile phone is becoming the go-to tool for this type of technology, definitely.
I also think, in the next 3 to 5 years, we're going to see massive advancements when it comes to NFC-based interactions between handsets and objects, IDs included. Here in Europe, it's going to be a legal, a matter of legal agreement that countries will all move to electronic IDs, chipped IDs, I guess, EIDs, in the sense that they're all chipped IDs. So all European IDs will be NFC enabled, and in a few years' time, it will be like paying with your telephone today. It will become very normal.
Yeah, and Apple's decision to open up the NFC system was a big game changer for this market as well, because obviously it means that all those iPhones out there now can support the chip reading as well.
So, a related question for both of you: can you share a little bit of insight about why liveness detection is so important?
Because you can pretend to be somebody else. Maybe put a simple scenario. If I want to pretend to be somebody else, I take their ID, I print out a large A4 picture of their face on a piece of paper and pretend to be them, and you sign up. So that's obviously a very amateur type of fraud, and almost everybody in the industry will know how to catch that. But you take that a couple of steps further, some of the cutting edge fraud people are talking about are things like deep fakes. How do you make sure that somebody using deep fake techniques would not be able to do the same thing, right? Take someone else's identity documents and sign up as somebody else. I think that's the basic idea, and that's broad implications, whether that's opening an account or boarding an airplane. These are equally relevant.
Yeah, and we're seeing around the world kind of increase in synthetic identity fraud. So it's critical that we can actually, first of all, detect that it's a live person, and then secondly, that person's bound to the trusted document, the passport or the ID. So it's a critical part of the process on onboarding. It must get right. I think liveness detection is a paramount to get right. As Sinhao said, it's a case of passive is better, because you don't have to blink or move eyes or move your face or to use voice recognition as well to increase the accuracy of that. So yeah, it's a very critical component of this technology.
Sure, thank you for that. Another question is changing consumer spending behavior driving the need for greater security? For example,
sorry, your sound broke up a little bit. Could you repeat?
Sorry. Is the changing consumer spending behavior driving the need for greater security? So, for example, contactless payments, click and collect, for example.
Contacts. Well, everything is going on digital. That much is clear. And we said at the beginning of the presentation that everything will be done at home, quite literally because of the pandemic. So there is a very, very strong drive to offer people the level of service and the convenience without having to leave their house. And I think the platforms, the handsets, are ready to do it. We've had incredible advances in it. So the technology drives the expectations a lot. I'm not sure I'm answering your question properly, but yes, I think they all fall under the same thing. Whether that's remote shopping, that's working through virtual workspaces, teleconferencing. The underlying theme is, for the time being, many of us are stuck at home. We're harnessing what the technology can offer us. Some and many of these technology will stay well past the pandemic, and they will, the ones that provide convenience will continue to stay with us after that.
Yeah, I think that we haven't mentioned about age verification. So that is, in terms of, particularly digital services, this can be used for that. It's important that when you're delivering certain services, which may be adult of content, then age verification is very important. So that, again, that initial proving who I am, proving how old I am, I think is an important application here. And I think there is so many different, I think we're only at the beginning of this, and looking at Sinhao's last slide, it was a number of verticals, a number of different applications, and I think we're just kind of scratching the surface of what this type of technology can offer us.
And what I'm convinced, if I can just add, what I'm convinced about is all the things that we take it for granted today, like going to a car rental to pick up a car, or boarding an airplane, or going to the hospital, or going to the post office, if you even need to go to the post office, all the things that we take it for granted, it will be as touchless as possible. The touchless journey was spoken in the context of pandemic, but the idea of offering end users a touchless journey is going to stay with us well beyond the pandemic.
Yeah.
Absolutely agree with you. I'm conscious we're coming up towards 3 o'clock, so just time for a couple more comments on the final question. Alan, perhaps you'd like to take this one first. Outside of financial services, what are the sectors that are deploying this technology?
Yeah, obviously, if we're talking about pandemic government services, though, so there was a big demand for this. When initially countries went into lockdown, they were offering kind of support, financial support and checks, etc., and social security. So there was, and that may be new to a lot of people. So they may have been kind of interacting with the government digitally for the first time. So the first thing you have to do is obviously prove your identity and to use a service like EIDV and document verification. So government services, healthcare, we're seeing a lot of chatter around kind of immunization passports. Again, we haven't talked about interoperability. There may be an issue there if we're kind of wanting to use these for for travel, etc. But there is and gaming, I think, kind of age verification, especially again for gaming. So there is, again, as I said, there is a whole stack of, I think, applications where this will be very successful.
Right. Anything to add, Sinhao?
Yeah, maybe I'll take something something we didn't talk about today, and sometimes people ask about this, which is digital identity. Okay, digital identity is kind of one step beyond identity verification. It's taking, once you've proven you are who you are, if you were to keep that identity somewhere, it could be in the cloud, it could be in your phone, it could be with somebody, and so the next time you come back, you already are proven who you are. Okay? There's a lot of space, and I know, Alan, you've written a report about digital identity. We didn't really talk about digital identity here. Now, I mentioned that because people actually want to get there. People actually want to get to digital identity. The vision in the industry, people talk about the vision in this space, they actually talk about digital identity. And what people expect to happen is that they don't expect you to every single time take out your ID card again to prove yourself again, okay? But before we can get there, so there's two things. One is before you can get there, the first time you do it, you got to sign up. So there is an equivalent of an equipment phase going on in the industry where banks have tons of account holders who have not gone through a digital onboarding. We have, whether that is healthcare, that could be government services, travel services, where it all exists in kind of an analog version. So everybody needs to get into a digital version of it. And then there are also services where they don't want to use digital identity because they want you to prove yourself again, or you don't want to leave your identity behind for privacy or other reasons. So you can basically say anytime you have a membership of some kind, this service is relevant because the first time you do it, you have to sign up. Anytime anywhere in the world where you have to type in and you have to prove yourself in terms of username, password, or have to take out your ID physically, you can think of all the places you do that, you can use this. So, it becomes a universal application. All you're doing is you're proving who you are.
World of possibilities. Great. Well, I'm conscious we're right on time now, so I'm going to thank Sinhao and Alan for a really informative session today. Thank you very much. And thank you also to our audience and for all of your questions. If we didn't manage to get to your question, I'm sorry, but we will absolutely follow up with you afterwards so to make sure you do get an answer. And we hope to see you back again at a future event. Now, we've got plenty of webinars and events happening at Good Intelligence this year, so please do keep an eye out for those and look forward to seeing you again soon. In the meantime, stay safe and well. Thank you for attending.